does Jesus actually explicitly name the one God of the Bible? And I mean, if Jesus does that, then it stands to reason that we need to listen to this, because Jesus should be an authority on this subject.
That's very true. I guess the greatest authority that we have is Jesus Christ, because God spoke through His Son, right? And yes, Jesus does identify who God is. Allow me to start with a conversation that Jesus had with a scribe that is found in Mark chapter 12, and I'd like to point a few things from it in Mark chapter 12, beginning at verse 28. And the Bible tells us, and one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, he, that is Jesus, answered them well, asked Jesus, which is the first commandment of all? And Jesus answered him, the first commandment, the first of all the commandments is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Now, this is the verse that you refer to, Virgil, from Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. Jesus was quoting this verse because it used to be called the Shema, hearing, that every Jew, every Israelite knew that verse, that the Lord our God is one Lord. Notice how the conversation goes. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. So you are to love Him with all your soul and with all your mind. Now, just a side note in here. How can you love someone with all your mind if in your mind you don't know who He is? It doesn't work. We can't. Jesus wasn't just advocating a blind love that is directed to someone we don't understand and we don't know who He is. No. We gotta love God with all our mind and our heart and our soul. In order to love Him with our mind, we have to love Him with our understanding and understand who He is, right? But let's keep going. And Jesus says, and the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. And the scribe said unto him, well, master, thou hast said well, for there is one God, and there is none other but He. And to love Him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, and with all the soul, and with all the strength, and to love his neighbor as himself is more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. So, what do we have in here? We have in here Jesus speaking to the scribe and telling him, there is none other God but one. And the scribe is saying, look, you've answered correctly, because there is one God and there is none other but He, right? So the scribe said to Jesus, you've answered correctly, because there is only one God and there is no one else but He is singular, only this one God. So here is the question that we need to answer. Who is this God that the scribe was talking about? Because the scribe was referring to He, to this one God. I mean, is this He, this one God, a Trinity? It could be, because the Trinity teaches there is one God. Is this He, this one God, the modalism, the Jesus only idea? It could be, because it's only one. Or is it referring to somebody else? Look, we'll see. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, who did the scribe and the Jews believe their God is? You see, the problem, Virgil, is that so many of us Christians, we pick up the Bible, we pick up the New Testament, and we read it with a 21st century mindset. We read it with thinking that when it refers to God, well, obviously it's referring to my God, the Trinity, or obviously it's referring to my God, the modalism, the Jesus only, or whatever it is. You can't do that. When you read the scriptures, you have to place yourself in their shoes and try to understand what did they believe, so you can better understand what they meant by it. So the question that we need to answer for ourselves now, who is the God of the Jews? Who did Jesus believe the one God is? Who did the Jews believe the one God is? Did they have a common understanding? They did. Notice what we read in John chapter 8 and verse 54. That's when they accused Jesus. Where is it? They said, we be born not of fornication, we have one Father, even God. They accused Jesus indirectly of being born of fornication, right? Notice what Jesus answers them in verse 42. We want to get to verse 54 actually, but he says, if God were your father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. So these Jews accuse Jesus of being born of fornication. Jesus tells them, hang on a second. If God was your father, because they said, we have one father, even God. So we are born of this one God. And Jesus says, if God was your father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God, from this God that you're talking about, Jews. I proceeded forth and came from this God. Notice if we go on to get to verse 54, Jesus answered, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father that honoreth me, of whom you say that he is your God. So when the Jews said, we are born of God, who did they refer to? God the Father. When Jesus says, I am born of that God, I proceeded forth and came from God, who was he referring to? To the Father. He says, my honor is, it is my Father that honoreth me, of whom you say that he is your God. Right? So the Jews believed, taught, and they said at the days of Jesus that we have one God, it is the Father. Jesus says, it is your God is my Father. Right? So that Jesus and the Jews had a common understanding that there is one God, and this one God is God the Father, from whom Jesus was brought forth. So the first century Jews did not believe what the 21st century Christians believed. 21st century Christians believe that the one God is a Trinity. It is not so. The first century Jews, the scribe that Jesus was talking to in Mark chapter 12 was one of them, a first century Jew. The first century Jews believed that the one God is the Father. Jesus understood that. Jesus knew that. Here he is in John chapter 8. He's telling them that. It is my Father that honoreth me, of whom you say that he is your God. Jesus knew that the Jews said that their God is his Father. Another story is found in John chapter 4 and verse 23, the woman at the well. She's asking Jesus, hey, where are we to worship? Who's the right God? Who has the truth, the Samaritans or the Jews? Notice what Jesus says. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipper shall worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. So all the Jews, including Jesus in the first century, believed and they knew that the one God they are to worship is God the Father. This is very plain in the scriptures, right? Now, if we go back to the conversation that Jesus had with the scribe, it becomes very important to know that, because when Jesus told him, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord," the scribe said to him, "You've answered correctly, Jesus, for there is one God and there is none other but he." Who did the scribe have in mind? Who was the scribe referring to when he said one God and there is none other but he? Was he referring to a Trinity? Was he referring to a Jesus only? Or was he referring to God the Father? He obviously was referring to God the Father, because this is the God of the Jews. Now, let us assume that the Jews were ignorant about the identity of God, and they wrongly believed that the true God, the only true God, is the Father. Let us assume that is the reality, right? And we read that Jesus came to declare the Father. Jesus came to make us understand the true God, right? So here in Mark chapter 12, we have a perfect opportunity for Jesus to correct the scribe and tell him, look, it's true, scribe, but I've come to reveal more light, because this one God is actually a Trinity. But that's not what Jesus says. Notice what Jesus goes on to say. And when Jesus saw that he, the scribe, answered discreetly, he said unto him, "Thou art not far from the kingdom of God." And no man after that durst ask him any question. So when Jesus said there is none other God but one. The scribe said, you are correct. You passed the test. There is none other God but one. Obviously, the scribe had the Father in mind. Jesus knew that. And Jesus said, you're right. Mark, recording this story, he says, when Jesus saw that he, the scribe, answered discreetly, these are not the words of Jesus. These are the words of Mark, right? And Mark is giving an observation. Mark is observing that the answer of this man was correct, and that Jesus noticed that the answer of this man is correct. Now, Mark is writing the gospel some many years after the death of Jesus. And we see that these many years after the death of Jesus, when this gospel was written, Mark was not a Trinitarian. Because Mark, observing the story and seeing, or rather reciting what happened, said that Jesus saw that the man, the scribe, answered discreetly or correctly. So here we have the testimony of Jesus, the testimony of Mark, and the scribe, the first century Jew. They all are agreeing that there is none other God but one. It is God the Father. In this conversation, we have Jesus approving the belief that the one God of the scriptures is God the Father. So does Jesus reveal who God is? He most definitely does. And here, in his conversation with the scribe, he revealed that God is the Father. The one God of the Bible is the Father. Further on in Matthew chapter 6, when he was teaching the disciples to pray, notice how he taught them to pray. He says, after this manner, therefore pray, our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. The kingdom belongs to the Father. Thy will be done. It's the will of the Father that is need to be done on earth and in heaven. So when Jesus taught the disciples, and hence he is teaching us to pray and how to worship this one God, he said, pray this way, our Father, which are in heaven. Another verse that's coming to my mind, which is a very well-known verse in John chapter 17 and verse 3, Jesus is praying to the Father, and in his prayer, notice what he says, and this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. So according to Jesus, who is the only true God? It is the one who is sent, Jesus Christ. It is God the Father. So look, from these few verses, I believe that Jesus clearly set forth to us who the one God of the Bible is. It is none other than God the Father, who is the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, whom Jesus referred to as the only true God. So I think this is enough verses to make the listener think and see that there is enough evidence to believe that the one God of the scriptures is the God of the Father according to Jesus, but we'll see more later according to the apostles and so forth.
What you've shared about Jesus's declaration on who the Father is, because that is what he came to do, to declare the Father, to make him known, is quite clear and apparent, and it really needs no further explanation. Jesus identified his Father as the only true God. And maybe just one more verse, Imad, and if you can, and just put this one on the screen, is in John 20, and I think it's verse 17, because what excites me is that the God whom Jesus identified is also the God that I want to serve, and I want to be on the side of Jesus, kind of a thing. Because when I'm with him, I'm safe. I know that what he is doing, what he is saying, is what I need to do as well. So he says something here on resurrection morning, and he says, Jesus saith unto her, touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. So Jesus identified that the God that she was worshiping or acknowledged was his Father and her Father, his God and her God. So really this with all the other evidence that you have given, really puts at least what Jesus said about God to bed. There shouldn't be any misunderstanding, because really, if you think about it logically, Imad, whenever Jesus speaks of the only true God and of God, if you were to replace that word God there with Trinity, it wouldn't make sense.
Exactly.
Because let's take, for instance, the verse that you said in John 17, verse 3. And this is life eternal, that they may know thee, the only true God. So that is now, if it were the Trinity, let's continue the verse. And him whom you have sent, Jesus Christ. So it just doesn't make sense, because the Trinity didn't send Jesus Christ, because according to the Trinity, Jesus is part of that God or group, as it were. So I agree 100% with you. And yes, this should be clear, and actually should be enough evidence to settle the matter altogether, because as you have said, the highest authority has spoken.